This is Everyday Spirituality with Connect at Faith. I am Debbie Vrankema, and we're here today with Jen Kohn, who is the owner of the Village Bookstore in Pleasantville, New York. Jen is part of our writer series, giving us perspective about what it looks like and feels like to own a local bookstore today. And I just thought we'd begin by asking you to tell us, how did this happen? Was this a childhood dream, or how did it happen that you became a bookstore person?
I've always been a voracious reader and the kind of kid, I'm one of four, and my mom would regularly kind of tell us all to leave the house and lock the back door and tell us to stay in the backyard for a while so she could take a break. And I would just sit and read at the backyard table, or my brother and sister would be running around. So they always thought I was a bit of a book nerd growing up. But I went to college and got a degree in communications and education and spent about 20 years doing communications work for a variety of businesses and agencies, mostly focused on education, working with schools and community libraries, as well as big tech companies and things like that. And when I hit my 40s, I was starting to sort of reevaluate what I wanted to do. I had 3 little children. I was working in the city. I was working quite a bit, and all the opportunities that were coming my way were even more work and more travel and more, good opportunities. But I think my husband and I started realizing, like, you really can't be away from home 4 weeks out of the year, or 6 weeks out of the year, traveling or coming home at 10 o'clock at night. And so what are other things we want to do? Our kids are getting older. They need us around. And so it sort of started out as a bit of a daydream that there was the Village Bookstore in town that I'd regularly go to, and started talking to the owners a little bit, asking them what their plans were, recognizing they might be close to retirement age. And my husband said, well, we can talk about it. Like, he's like, I don't know if a bookstore is like the best business to go into right now, Amazon and all these things that are going on. And so we looked at the numbers and took a deeper look at it, and then said, and he said, oh, maybe we could do it. Maybe it's a possibility. And so we made the decision to try to do it, and went ahead and did it. I guess that was in 2018. Okay. And the very, very end of 2018, I took over during holiday season. So if you're out there and you're thinking about starting a bookstore, do not do it then. It's very crazy, and if you don't know what you're doing, you'll make a lot of mistakes. But we did it, and we've been happy. We've done it. It's, kept us closer to home. I can see my kids a little bit more, and it's been good to be part of the community in a different way than just living in the community. Get to know people in a different way, and get to know other cultural organizations differently. So that's been really fun.
Yeah. So have you made some partnerships along the way with some of the different cultural organizations?
Yeah, we work pretty closely with lots of libraries. I mean, sometimes people think that's odd because they think we're competitive, which we're not. Like, I always tell people to go to the library, especially people are like, oh, I'm not sure if my son or daughter will like this. I'm like, go to the library, get some other books and see what they like, and you can always buy the ones you want to keep on your bookshelf. So we do lots of events during normal times and pandemic times with local libraries all across Westchester County, which has been really fun. I really like working with them, especially right here in Mount Pleasant Public Library. We've partnered together on kids events. I love working with the youth folks there. So we brought in local youth illustrators and authors and done events with them. If you're not familiar with our store, it's quite small. It's less than 1,000 square feet. It's hard to do an event. We just don't have the room. So it's nice. We work with the libraries who do have usually larger community spaces to do things. We've also been lucky to work with Jacob Burns Film Center, which is right across the street from us, to do author events and film/author events, which is great. So that's been nice too. Yeah. So it's been good. And we also work with historical societies and other cultural institutions throughout Westchester.
Great. So what have the surprises in doing this work?
Well, I mean, probably the biggest surprise was the pandemic.
Yeah. I mean, right.
No one expected to run, we knew there'd be challenges running a small retail business, and that things happen with the economies and things, but I think the pandemic threw a big curveball that we weren't, none of us were expecting. And so I think, I'm sure you changed what you do in your pastorship. Like so much of us had to change, everyone's lives changed dramatically. We've been really lucky, again, working in a small community and having, when at the time Governor Cuomo said, okay, New York, we're shutting down, you know, that was a big question. Well, what does that mean? Can I not run the business?
Right.
And so I immediately went out to the mayor and said, if I operate in this fashion, is that safe? Can we continue to operate? And he got back to me right away, and they had some talks with the county executives, and they said, that's fine, do that. So we closed to the public for a few months, but we're still open online. People could make orders online, people could call in. We did deliveries all across my husband and I and our staff would be in the cars driving once we closed, you know, till 8, 9 o'clock at night, making deliveries. Yeah. And we did pickups only outside, which is really funny. We had a table outside, and people who don't live in town would be very nervous that someone would take their books. Oh, I'm like, okay. I'm like, it's going to be fine. No one's going to take, like, we've never had an issue. And so that was just, you know, like, it was nice. We could put out lots and lots of bags of books and people would come take them. So I think that in some ways we were luckier than people in big urban centers who had to go through lots of red tape and to figure out what they could do. And some businesses were just closed for, you know, for a period of time, and you have a small business like that, it's very difficult to close for any extended period of time. Right. So well, I
love that you came up with those creative, that you came up with those creative ways to, because I would imagine that there were a lot of people that wanted books during the pandemic.
Yeah, and also
everything else was shut down.
Yes, people wanted to read, and unfortunately, and everyone was home, right? The schools were closed, many businesses were closed, and libraries for a period of time were even closed. So a lot of big, you know, folks who really relied on the library didn't have that option for a little bit there until they figured out what they wanted to do. So that we met quite a few new people that we hadn't known before, and we've still continued deliveries now to some assisted living facilities and things like that we started, especially Kendall and Hudson, which is here in Westchester County. That's become a regular part of the business now because it was a need, and folks couldn't get out. So I think that it was challenging, but also helped us see some needs in the community that could be filled even well, we're still in the pandemic, but hopefully at some point post-pandemic or whatever the new normal looks like living with the COVID.
And Kendall and Hudson is, do you want to tell people what that is?
Sure. Kendall and Hudson is assisted living. It's a assisted living facility, but I think they have both. They have folks who move there and then they can opt into assisted living at some point. So it's a community for older folks who want to be in that facility.
Okay. So then you started deliveries to help the people get books that were kind of stuck in the assisted living at this point.
In the very beginning, people really didn't want to go out at all. I would say that switched a bit as people started to realize they could. Some people are like, no, I want to come pick up at the table. I need to leave my house.
Yeah.
I need to just do something so I could get in my car, drive. Even if I walk up and down the street, it was something to do. And then there are some people just were more homebound because of the, whatever health reasons or whatnot because of the pandemic.
Okay. So what do you think the role of a local bookstore is in today's world? Do you have a sense of big picture? Is it important to have local bookstores, and why?
Yeah, I mean, I always visit bookstores when I travel, and I always have before I owned the store. And I think it continues, there's many of the larger bookstores that people went to growing up or were in malls are not around. There's been a lot of closures. We used to have a huge Borders out in Mount Kisco that closed several years back. Barnes & Noble has reduced its footprint. So there's still, I think, there's a few thousand indie bookstores across the country. And I think, what people say to me and what I like too, visiting other bookstores, it's so nice to browse a bookstore and see how it's curated. And every indie bookstore is different based on the approach that bookstore. There's a new bookstore, I think it's on the West Coast, that she curates by emotion.
Really? Okay.
Yeah, which I don't know how she does. I think that's really challenging. But there's some bookstores that are very politically motivated and have a specific place in their community because of that. There's other bookstores that are just mystery bookshops or cookbook drama. You get those sometimes in larger cities, but even here, in Chappaqua, I think there's Blind Dog Books where he has his collection of used things from, I think, his private collection. And so I
Okay.
think when you are looking online for things, you don't discover in the same way, you don't explore in the same way. And so from just that perspective of being a book lover, to walk in a bookstore and look through shelves and discover something that's not being brought to you by an algorithm or because of what you bought before, but because of your own personal decisions at that time. I mean, I think the other part of bookstores in many communities and in ours is like a gathering place for people. They catch up with neighbors and say hello, and they get information and resources. We always talk about Hudson Valley Writer Center is another cultural institution I should have mentioned before. They do a lot of poetry readings, and whenever I have someone buy poetry, I'm like, oh, if you love poetry, you should be checking out Hudson Valley Writers. They have these great programs. So I think those are those connections that people make. They also often come into the shop and be like, where should I eat? Where should I, they want to know like
So they
things
kind
in
of
the
trust
neighborhood. Yeah. And I think, many other stores that there are some bookstores now that have moved to being nonprofits. And so they can produce cultural events and programming in a different way that they otherwise can't do because they just can't be profitable doing it, but they can do it as a nonprofit entity. And I've sat in on some seminars about that, just what that looks like and how people, similar to Jacob Burns, which is a nonprofit in the community, very viable, bringing independent films, but they also do huge education programs. So some stores have moved in that direction too, stores that are a bit larger than us, providing writing classes and other things that are otherwise hard to find.
Okay. And so do you work with writers much? I heard you say that you've been working with Hudson Valley Writers Center.
Yeah, Hudson Valley, we support events there and the poetry readings they do. And if you're a poetry fan, it's great too. They've been doing the events online during the pandemic. We do author events for local authors. We've even done launch events in people's homes pre-pandemic. They're doing a book launch. We've done them across Westchester for folks, which is fun. Okay. I mean, one thing that happened during the pandemic is anyone who ever thought about writing a book did write a book. And so the honest answer, we've been kind of overwhelmed with local authors sending us things. It's gotten, it can be overwhelming too, because there's so many people and buying, and it's hard. It's hard to sell your book. It's hard to promote a book. It can be challenging. So we've sort of set up a process to do that because we can get overwhelmed too. We have a box of books people want us to read, and we're we're a small staff. So we do sometimes work with local authors and support local authors when it's possible.
So at this point then, are you running this with your husband, or is it just you running it?
It's really just me. I mean, my husband helps behind the scenes with financial things and back office things because he's particularly good at that, but it's really me. Yeah.
So is it overwhelming? Is it fun? Is it a little bit of both?
I think it's a little bit of both. I think, I think everyone knows what a small business is like when you work like I did in corporate and you have a team of people who do things, and there's accounting and there's someone else who takes care of office supplies and then all of a sudden you're like, oh, that's me now. Like I take care of office supplies. If there's no toilet paper, it's my fault.
Right.
So when you do everything, including the accounting and the taxes, like before when you have specialists who do all those things and you're just like, oh, did this get done? So I think that's challenging for someone like me who's worked in, I've worked mostly in small businesses, but still you get specialization. So I think that's
you had a particular role, and now
you do what you're good at,
so.
And then someone else takes care of other things. So I think that was a little challenging. It's something you get used to and you set up routines around that. So yeah, I think it's fun and it's exciting. I think when I came into it, I thought we were going to be doing all these more things and had big plans to do certain things that sort of like, oh, we don't have time to do this, that, or that. And also I think the pandemic sort of made that a little harder too, just because things shifted a bit. So yeah, but it's overall, it's fun. It's good. And it's different too, because you are very community facing. So anyone who and that too from running a church, so people, I get lots of opinions and advice from people, and that's great. And we have to take that all in.
Right. You have a presence in the community, and people know who you are, even if you don't know who they are. Right.
Yeah. So people,
and that's a different role. Right.
Yeah. It's a little where people be like, that's the woman who owns the bookstore, to their, and it's funny now because we're all wearing masks all the time. So sometimes I'll see someone I know that's in a store customer in town, but I'm like, I don't know if they know who I am without my mask right now. I'm like, hey, it's the lady from the bookstore.
So do you feel like in terms of, we call this podcast Everyday Spirituality, and I guess I'm wondering, do you feel like this is a fulfilling thing for you on any kind of a spiritual level, or on a what is life about kind of level?
Yeah, I mean, I think that that's a good question. I think that I like the role of like helping, like, one of my favorite things is when we have a lot of kids come into the store and they spend time in the store and they'll get excited about reading. And, we think all these kids, all they do all day is be on their phones and their computer, but they still get really excited about books, and they'll sit on the
That's
floor. I
good.
even have, teenagers who'll sit on the floor together and have a tower of books next to them, and they'll be deciding, because they have, $20 in their pocket. We can buy one book. What are we going to buy today? And we'll share it.
Oh,
And
cool.
I think from that perspective, like I love having kids in the store. And this summer, especially because of COVID and stuff, just more and more kids coming in, reading, excited about books. So I think that part is very fulfilling to me. And I'm a little concerned that even in our education system, we're taking away those opportunities from kids a lot. We're giving them more and more screens and devices to look at, and we're taking away the physical object of a book. And I think they want that, and we are taking that away a bit. So I'm glad that libraries and bookstores give that back to kids, and do that. And I think it is also been good, fulfilling, just to be part of the community in a different type of way, and to provide people with the experience of talking about books. And I love when customers come in and help each other buy books, because they'll recommend, and they have these deep conversations, because they're kind of like, if you're in a bookstore, you're like bookstore people, those are kind of your people. And like, I love hearing conversations like where someone will say, oh, if you like this, they'll get, they'll go right in and do recommendations. And I think that's been really nice. And so having that connection to people in the community, especially kids. I love when I'll run into a mom somewhere else and they'll be like, oh, my daughter bought this and you guys recommended it. She loved it. She's reading the whole series. And so I think those little things, like, I hope that kids, through teachers and librarians and bookstores, develop something that becomes a lifelong passion. And for me, it was that way. Like, I was the kid who was left at the library on a school field trip because I was in the stack somewhere. And, I just hope that we continue to do that. I think kids need books in their lives. And so that part's really fulfilling.
That's awesome to hear you have sort of a lifelong passion that you're getting to live out in this.
Yeah, exactly. It's harder than ever to read.
Yeah.
So busy.
Right, because you're so busy.
Right.
Definitely. That's true. That's the fantasy when you're a kid. Oh, I'll own a bookstore and I'll just sit around and read all the books. And
right. My booksellers always laugh because customers will be like, oh, do you just sit here and read all day? And they're like, ha ha ha. Like, you're busy in the store. There's things to do. They're like, this is not where I spend my time. I'm reading.
Reading. Exactly.
Like, that's in the movies.
So what else would you like to tell us today? Do you want to tell us where people can find you online or physically? Or
sure. Yeah. So the Village Bookstore is located in Pleasantville, New York, if you're not from the area. We are right across the street from the Jacob Burns Film Center. That's probably the best known landmark in town. If you want to find us online, we're at www.thevillagebookstore.net, N-E-T, because .com was very expensive. So you can find us there 24/7 or in town during, regular business hours.
Great. Thank you so much for being with us today. It's been really great to hear your perspective and have this conversation.
Thanks, Debbie.
Thank you. This has been the Everyday Spirituality Podcast with Connect.Faith. Thank you for joining us. And if you'd like to subscribe, please do that and recommend to your friends. You can find it wherever you find podcasts. Thanks so much.